So, good evening, everyone. So, this is another lesson to our subject, the teacher and the school curriculum. So, our topic for today is curricular reforms in teacher education. So, we are very familiar with the OBE or the outcome-based education. So, because this is became the fundamental philosophy of higher education in the Philippines lately. So, all curricula, including that of teacher education, will be anchored on the concept of OBE in terms of course designing, the instructional planning, um, teaching and assessing students' learning. So, this topic will explain the significant reform in teacher education in the Philippines. So, the reason why we hear a lot of educators talking about OBE and what is the outcome-based education about. So should curriculum for a teacher preparation be influenced by this and why? How will OBE address the 21st century teachers? So we will talk about those questions as we go further to our discussion. So in recent years, there has been an increasing attention on the outcome-based education for several reasons. So these include return of investment and accountability, which are driven by political, economic, and educational reasons. So for better understanding of our lesson for today, let us first define the definition of the outcome-based education. So among the many advocates of the OBE in the early years, um, W. Spady defined OBE as clearly focusing and organizing everything in the education system around the essential for all the students to do successfully at the end of their learning experiences. So, it starts with a clear picture of what is important for students to be able to do, then organizing the curriculum, instruction, and assessment to make sure that learning happens. So, this definition clearly points to the desired results of education, which are the learning outcomes. So these are made up of knowledge, understanding, skills, and attitudes that students should acquire to make them reach their full potential and lead fulfilling lives as individuals in the community at work. So to define and clarify further, answers to the following questions should be addressed by the teacher. So, number one question is what do we want the students to learn? So, we need to determine first our objectives and what are the reasons or what are the needs of our students. Next is why do we want students to learn these things? So, what are the purpose of having this kind of topic that we need to discuss. So, how can we best help students to learn these things? So, what are the techniques or methods or strategies that we will use in order for our students to learn those specific topics? So, how will you know when the students have learned? So, of course, we need to identify the assessment that we will use in order for us to evaluate the performance or have our students learn something from the discussion. So, state the premise that in outcomes-based education, all students can learn and succeed, but not at the same time or in the same way. Because, first of all, our students are unique in their own ways. So, successful learning promotes even more successful learning. And lastly, schools and teachers control the conditions that will determine if the students are successful in school learning. So let's now proceed to four essential principles in OBE. So in order to comply with these three premises, four essential principles should be followed in their planning, instruction, teaching, and assessing learning. So in principle 1, we have the clarity of focus. So a clear focus on what teachers want students to learn is the primary principles in OBE. So teachers should bear in mind that the outcome of teaching is learning. So to achieve this, teachers and students should have a clear picture in mind of what knowledge, skills, values must be achieved at the end of the teaching learning process. So this is like looking straight ahead so that the target will be reached. So in principle 2, we have the designing backwards. So this principle is related to the first, which is the principle 1, the clarity of focus. So at the beginning of a curriculum design, the learning outcome has to be clearly defined. So what to achieve at the end of formal schooling is determined at the beginning. So decisions are always traced back to the desired results. So this means that planning, implementing, teaching, and assessing should be connected to the outcomes. While in principle 3, which is high expectation, so by establishing high expectations or challenging standards of performance will encourage, of course, our students to learn better. So this is linked to the premise that successful learning promotes more successful learning, as mentioned by Spady in 1994. So this is parallel to Thorndike's law of effect, which says that success reinforcement learning motives, building confidence, and encourages learners to do better. Lastly is the principle 4, which is the expanded opportunities. So in OBE, all students are expected to excel, of course. So hence, equal expanded opportunities should be provided. So as advocates of multiple intelligences, every child has a genius in him or herself, hence is capable of doing the best. So meaning learners develop inborn potentials if corresponding opportunities and support are given to nurture. So let us now proceed to teaching learning in OBE. So teaching is teaching if learners learn. So always remember, teaching is teaching if learners learn. So learning is measured by its outcome. So whatever approach to teaching is used, the intent should focus on learning rather than on teaching. So subjects do not exist in isolation, but links between them should be made. So it is important that students learn how to learn, and a teacher should be innovative. So how then should teaching learning be done in OBE? So here are some tips. So teachers must prepare students adequately. So this can be done if the teachers know what they want the students to learn and what learning outcomes to achieve. So the prerequisite knowledge is important and a review is necessary at the start of a lesson. Second, teacher must create a positive learning environment. So students should feel that regardless of the individual uniqueness, the teacher is always there to help. So teacher and student relationship is very important. So the classroom atmosphere should provide respect for the diverse kind of learners. Next is teachers must help their students to understand what they have to learn, what they should learn, and how will they know that they have learned. So fourth is teachers must use a variety of teaching methods. So the most appropriate strategy should be used taking into account the learning outcome teachers want the students to achieve. Also, to consider are the contents, the characteristics of the students, the resources available, and the teaching skill of the teacher. So even if OBE is learner-centered, sometimes more direct, time-tested methods of teaching will be appropriate. Next is teachers must provide students with enough opportunities to use the new knowledge and skills that they gain. So when students do this, they can explore with new learning, correct errors, and adjust their thinking. So application of learning is encouraged rather than mere accumulation of this. Last is teachers must help students to bring each learning to a personal closure that will make them aware of what they learn. So here are the key points in teaching learning in OBE which show the shifts from traditional to an OBE view. So as you can see here, in traditional view, its focus is on the instruction, while on OBE views, the focus is in the learning. Traditional view focuses on inputs and resources, while the OBE focuses on the learning outcomes of the learner. Next is the knowledge is transferred by the teacher, while in the OBE views, knowledge are already exist in the mind of the learners. Next is when in traditional views, teacher dispenses knowledge, while in OBE views, teacher are designers of methods. So last, in the traditional views, teachers and students are independent and in isolation, while in OBE views, teacher and students work in teams. Let's proceed to the assessment of learning outcomes in OBE. So, assessment in OBE should also be guided by the four principles. So, what are the four principles? These are the clarity of focus, designing backwards, high expectations, and expanded opportunity. So, it should contribute to the objective of the improving students' learning. Since OBE, there is a need first to establish a clear vision of what the students are expected to learn. So then assessment becomes an embedded part of the system. So to be useful in OBE system, assessment should be guided by the following principles. Number one is assessment procedure should be valid. So when we say valid or the procedures are valid, it should actually assess what intends to test. Next is if its assessment procedure should be reliable, the results should be consistent. Assessment should be fair, so cultural background and other factors should not influence assessment procedure. Fourth is assessment should reflect the knowledge and skills that are important to students. Fifth is the assessment should tell both the teachers and students how students are progressing. This is involved in our evaluations. Sixth is the assessment should support every student's opportunity to learn things that are important. So, assessments should allow individuality or uniqueness to be demonstrated. And last is assessment should be comprehensive to cover a wide range of learning outcomes. So let's now proceed to the learner's responsibility for learning. So in OBE, students are responsible for their own learning and progress. So nobody can learn for the learner. So I want you to remember that nobody can learn for the learner. So it is only the learner himself or herself who can drive himself or herself to learn. So learning is a personal matter. So teachers can only facilitate that learning and define the learning outcomes to be achieved and assist the students to achieve those outcomes. So students have the bigger responsibility to achieve those outcomes. So in this way, they will be able to know whether they are learning or not. So one of the great benefits of outcome-based education is that it makes students aware of what they should be learning. So why they are learning it, what they are actually learning, and what they should do when they are learning. So all of this will include with the achieved learning outcomes. So in terms of students' perspectives, there are common questions that will guide them as they learn under the OBE curriculum framework. So to guide the students in OBE learning, they should ask themselves the following questions. So number one, what do I have to learn? So what do I have to learn it? What will I be doing while I am learning? How will I know that I am learning and what should be learning? Will I have any say in what I learn and how will I be assessed? So these are the questions that commonly asked by the students under the OBE curriculum. So that's all for our today's lesson. So I hope you learned something, and the same mechanics, I will send the link and you have only 30 minutes to answer. So thank you very much.